welcome to this final first look exploring session looking at the Alexandrian Tragedy by Sir William Alexander. We have had some interesting times with this play. It's sort of exploded form of looking at the collapse of an empire. It's not that interested in following a direct narrative. It's much more interested in sort of throwing us into moments within this post-Alexandrian world. The tragedy is not that of Alexander. It is the tragedy of everything that follows after his death. It's the tragedy of the situation he's left everybody else in. We're rejoining the script at Act 4, Scene 2. Now, those who watched the previous video will know that everything went a bit wrong when we hit Act 4, Scene 2 last time. So we started reading Act 4, Scene 2, and bits of it were from Act 4, Scene 2, but some bits were not from Act 4, Scene 2. So just ignore when we did Act 4, Scene 2 last time. But do remember what we did with Act 5, Scene 1, because we won't go back and do Act 5, Scene 1 again here. We will just skip past it. It's quite a good scene, but thankfully not strong on important details. There's some little details at the end of it which we'll mention in passing when we get to it, but otherwise it didn't matter. But it's a good scene. There's some philosophers sort of being philosophy. It's quite fun. Anyway, we're going to, as I say, do Act 4, Scene 2 properly this time, and hopefully the script is now all sorted out and will all make sense. So reading with us today, reading Ptolemy and Nuntius is...
Hello, I'm Valentina. I am an Italian actor and voiceover artist in London.
Reading Cassander and Philastrus is...
Lynsey Beauchamp, actor in Scotland.
Reading Olympias today is...
Liza Graham, American actor in London.
Reading Seleucus today is...
Hi, I'm Tom from Brighton.
And reading Lysimachus and Chorus is... Greg?
Hello, sorry, brain dead. Hello, I'm Greg. And it's been a hell of a week. A bit like it sounds like it's been in the play, really.
Yeah, I'm going to say that this is a play very much about what happens without good management. And I'm your host, Robert Crighton. I will be reading when acts happen and occasionally stating who characters are and generally keeping things moving forward. So without further ado, we're going to dive into Act 4, Scene 2. We're meeting for the first time Cassander, and we're rejoining Lysimachus, one of the lesser generals. I can't remember if he's actually a general or not, just someone moderately high up in the power structure, but who has been heard plotting before about how he might vie for some power, and Cassander, who has done some betraying in the past. So we're going to see what their place in the power structure is. The previous scene in Act 4 was a scene between one of the followers of a general who's just lost, making a new alliance with a chap called Antigonus, and we'll see whether that leads to any kind of fallout or not. But Act 4, Scene 2, Cassander and Lysimachus.
And must we buy our pomp at such a rate, who bear the authority or whom it bears? Oh, how thorny are the ways of state, with open dangers paved, and secret fears. Each of our steps is weighted with some snare, whilst from ourselves we all repose repel, and in frail barks, pressed by tempestuous care, do seek a haven, whose heaven is but a hell.
Whilst Aeolus and Neptune joined in all, with winds and waves beat the earth and brag the skies. The tumbling mountains do not rise and fall, though each of them another doth surprise. As do the aspiring powers which are with doubt tossed through the waving world on stormy thrones, and are, as in a circle, hurled about, ascending and descending both at once. Lo, some whose hopes would at their birth have seen by fortune's strictness with contempt confined, have from the vulgar yoke themselves redeemed, to do far more than such durst have designed. And they who once might life to thousands give, when some great period revolution springs, brought down even low, cannot have leave to live, made less than subjects who were more than kings.
What once they scarce could dream, some thus procure, whose power, though naught at first, last sceptres sways, and some whose state seemed once to be secure, thrown from their fortune's height, lose glorious bays. My father, lo, to gain that sovereign place, through many dangers boldly marched of late, and then the greater for a space, did manage all the Macedonian state. But I, his son, who, as some would suppose, might keep with ease that which he got with pain, can by no means my restless thoughts repose, such raging tyrants o'er my fancies reign.
And yes, I think you have an easy part, to whom his state your father did resign, for it may make you smart, which made him smart. Some press the grape, and others drink the wine.
He not believe that ever any ill was bred for me within my father's breast, since children must suppose their parents' will, though seeming bad, still purposed for the best. My father's ghost must pardon me, though when from us he minded to remove, I think the tenor of his last decree showed lack of judgment, or at least of love. For what base course had ever been begun to make me seem not worthy of his place, that he preferred a stranger to his son, as bent to cloud the glory of his race? Thus, since in such a sort he did neglect the son, who should his name from death exempt, as disregarded for some great defect, all other men may have me in contempt. But ere his age attained the final date, he saw my brows with laurel boughs arrayed, and spied my skill in war and wit in state, which grew as much as his had then decayed. Nor can my courage so be brought to bow, but polyperson shall by proof find soon that in my father's will I will allow not what he did, but what he should have done. And since by him high dignities were won, I mind to prosecute what he began. For though I would so great a father's son, cannot securely live a private man. Lo, polyperson by a power repelled from Macedon hath retired dismayed, and for the fear of us hath been compelled to rest beholding for another's aid. Let him not think that shadows, though of kings, can match my power with these his borrowed bands. A doubtful flight, all framed with others' wings, will never bear him from Cassander's hands. And though Olympias countenance once his cause, as from Epirus come to ruin me, now of her own misfortune she must pause, since brought of late unto a low degree.
And yet Olympias once did prosper well, when first she touched the Macedonian bounds, while Polyperson proudly did repel all those who just resist with words or wounds. Though Philip and Eurydice, his queen, to give them battle bent in time arrived, the Macedonians, when they had her seen as their own queen, to do her honour strived. And hapless Philip, whilst constrained to yield there for the kings to take a captive state. And with his mates, though flying from the field, which followed by their force and by her fate, then did her husband and herself give place, whose brows of later diadem had worn. Murdered and thrown down in depths of black disgrace, were made a pride the prey, the butt of scorn.
Those were the means which did them first entrap. But have you heard how after they were thrall to plague the world with horror and mishap, the proud Olympias tyrannized o'er all?
Some doubtful rumours did frequent each ear, such as rash fame confusedly dost unfold, but yet by favour hid, or else by fear, the truth of all, it may be, was not told.
When thus the tigress happened to surprise those wretched souls, as ravished in a dream, her heart at first seemed scarce to trust her eyes. She surfeited her sight so with their shame, but when she saw, by reason of her power, that she might safely let her rage burst out, She them about caused build a lightless tower, pressed by whose walls they scarce could turn about. And in that dungeon, as entombed, they stood with high disgrace to appease more high disdains, far from all comfort, whilst a little food their life prolonged, but to prolong their pains. But for misfortune pity last doth plead, as envy doth prosperity oppose. The Macedonians, then indifferent made, on murmured rumours doubtfully did glose. The people's grudge Olympias did perceive, and of just fury, fearing the effect, she straight resolved life's remnant to bereave from weakened powers which did no less expect. And when some Thracians, basely bent for blood as she had charged, with mercenary spite, had murdered Philip, and his queen embrued with these red streams that drowned her life's delight, she sent to her whose soul in grief did sink, as messengers of death to brag her breast, a sword, a cord, and an empoisoned drink, a tyrant's presence, yet a wretch's best. Those seen the queen unmoved this speech did make, as one who had embraced some great relief. Fit gifts for her to give, for me to take, since she exceeds in hate and I in grief, and tell the tyrant that I gladly die, that once the angry gods to venge my death may thunder forth that judgment which I spy with blood must choke that bloody woman's breath. Last, looking on her lord who there lay slain, once partner of his joy, then of his woe, whilst that his roses still her lilies stained, she kissed his wounds, as taking leave to go, lest time her resolution had betrayed. Her snowy neck, not used with such a chain, her girdle grasped, and then died, no way dismayed. And if she sighed but for disdain.
This barbarous act, my breast with grief doth sting. I can spite so much transport the meekest kind. And yet on the earth is no more cruel thing than malice raging in a woman's mind.
But yet this sacrifice could not assuage the boiling thoughts of her unbounded will, for entering thus she rioted in rage, as dogs that once get blood would always kill. Each light occasion kindling her wrath, the sovereignty she shamefully abused, and put my brother Nicanor to death, though for no crime condemned, no, not accused. And some, when dead, and hate by her was born, whose cruelty no flood of blood can find, of Iolus the tomb profanely torn, she, robbing the earth, with ashes stained the wind. To be Cassander's friend was such a crime, as none could scape who ever favoured me. Thus huge disorders did abound a time. Where laws not valued are, all things are free. When having heard of this outrageous pride, which made my native soil contemned to be, I those indignities could not abide, whose shame and danger did aim most at me. So that at last, moved by my country's care, as much as by particular respects, I with great speed an army did prepare to punish or prevent the like effects. But when I was to Macedonia come, to fortify a town, she did resign, which I enclosed and quickly did o'ercome, whilst famine forced the fortress to resign. Then to necessity weak pride gave place, her lofty courage was constrained to bow, so that she rests depending on our grace, to be disposed as it shall please us now.
this chance the world to wander may invite. Lo, there's a queen who had, though now distressed, the rarest fortune and the greatest sprite that have ever any of her sex possessed. The widowed empress who first bragged the Indies, or proud Sombrous, who, though both praised have been, or the Amazons all born with martial minds, have never been more stout than was this queen. Her life's first progress did but love proved so sweet, whom once the world with treasures strive to bless. But now, poor sad soul, foiled under fortune's feet, her misery no creature can express.
Those were but fortune's gifts which made her great, whilst treacherous shows by shallow wits were praised. Her imperfections did but stain the state, where her, not hers, but others' merits raised. When first that dame with famous Philip matched, her cunning carriage was not free from blame, but though she then with Argos' eyes was watched, as was supposed, soon forfeited her fame. At least shame feared he did her first disdain, and of that sex the precious fame is such, their tender honour any breath may stain, if tainted foul, if but suspect too much. Yet this at last did his destruction breed, for which her spiteful thoughts had laboured long. She by Pausanias, privy to his deed, had spurred him to perform the intended wrong, and by such means long sought, that to her will her husband's murder might enlarge the reigns, whilst backed by power she boldly did the ill, of which too late the troubled realm complains. Though loathed of all, long suffered for her son, she played the tyrant safely as she pleased. But by the course that I have now begun, I hope those whom she plagued shall be appeased.
Yet of Olympias, that cast down by you, the sight her son and her husband will revive, and so may take the Macedonians now for her relief strange courses to contrive. Of those whose greatness doth regard extort, the miseries in tender every mind, and still the affections of the vulgar sort are headlong led, too cruel or too kind.
Oh, but I can precipitate her fall, even by the means which might support her most. For pity shall bar pity, whilst they all wail for their friends who through her pride were lost.
As to those to whom all other things are free, must have their life and reign both of one date. So private men who pass their own degree can hardly turn to take their former state. Your fortune thus is trusted to the fates. None can retire who enters in such things. All those who dare attempt against great states must die as traitors or else live as kings. And though you would but some disorders stay, you deal with those who, or not to be thrall, as torrents bear away what stops their way. And must of force, if not undone, do all such those set free will storm when they are gone, while who scorn to take the thing that they should give. All those must die who dare but such a throne, who may endanger kings, they must not live.
Since in this course I only once can err, I shall be sure ere she herself withdraw.
And yet what surety can you have of her? Can laws bind them who are above the law? Who can a concord make betwixt the two, whereas the one must hate, the other fear?
Oh, but I mind to use the matter so that both from hence shall further strife forbear.
What can her freedom and your peace procure?
Death both can make her free and me secure.
And would you do such ill to shed her blood?
Yea, ill to others, so it do me good.
The Macedonians will abhor this wrong.
And yet obey me if I be most strong.
Who shall have the realm amidst these broils?
Whoever wins the field doth own the spoils.
So to possess the realm you have no right.
But I have more, so long as I have might.
This state doth to itself an heir afford.
All kingdoms' rights are pleaded by the sword,
The people all will grudge against your state,
but dare not stir whilst fear exceeds their hate.
and in their hearts they will detest you too.
Think what they will who have no power to do.
What though Olympias in a little space may lose her power together with her breath, yet there remains another of her race who is by nature bound to avenge her death.
The raging streams of a tempestuous flood which drowns the old not yields the young relief. What fool who of his foes victorious stood would spoil an army and yet spare the chief? No, since I must myself with murder stain, I'll by the roots raise all the royal race, so that no power shall spring from thence again that may myself or yet my plants displace. The strength hath left great Alexander's arm, whose mother's fatal thread is now near spun, and I have means to keep myself from harm, both of Roxanne and her tender son. But since this course may much our states advance, by which a ground for great attempts is laid, I must entreat you now, whatever chance, to lend us your applause, though not your aid.
I'll be your friend, yet wish you would refrain from doing this, but ere you be undone, since by your guiltiness I thus may gain, I'll suffer that which I would not have done.
And they exit, and once again we have a scene where two people have a conflab, and what they say, shall we be friends? Yeah, let's be friends. Lysimachus, who was very much part of a policy of sitting on the fence and waiting for everybody else killing each other, is there to lend us your applause, though not your aid. Cassander knows he's not going to help him at all. What a fascinating scene. It's talking about that problem of what do you do with your opponents once you have taken them out. Once Olympias has been captured, well, you've got to keep going. You've got to kill her, and you've got to kill all the descendants. They've all got to die, and it's almost like Cassander is just testing out all the arguments that he's going to make in public. Because, this isn't the Olympias that we recognise from earlier in the play. Is Cassander telling the truth about how awful Olympias was? Has she actually committed terrible war crimes? She might have done. Or is this the spin with which he's going to put out there as an excuse for having her killed? Because, news of terrible, nasty prison conditions for her vanquished foes. And, preceded by Cassander basically going, why didn't Daddy give me everything, or all my inheritance? And and he's really weirdly touchy when Lysimachus says, well, people, Olympias was sort of loved, and people did think quite a lot of her, and Cassander said, yeah, but she just got that from other people. And I'm sort of going, did you not just listen to what you said at the beginning of this scene? Literally exactly the same thing. So it's fascinating actually that this is drawing these things out, and I don't wholly know where to land on some of this stuff. It's actually because it's these unreliable narrators. I don't know whether I can trust Cassander's what he's saying about his enemies. I don't trust anyone in this play. I'll go to Liza first for thoughts, because you've been here for all the sessions. Am I on the right track, or did you feel I'm verging just down my own fundament?
Well, when we last saw Olympias and Roxanne having a confab last session, they seem to be pretty sure that Alexander had been poisoned by Cassander. So I think if we're meant to take their testimony as true, then in a play where everyone is plotting against each other and no one's hands are completely clean, Cassander seems not to be a trustworthy source, and he seems to be seeking he intends to kill Olympias, right? That's pretty much what he said in this scene.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, explicitly.
And so by saying, oh, she's no angel, she's terrible, she's an awful person, he seems to be sort of seeking justification for that.
Plus, she's been coming after all my friends. She's got this grudge against me. If I don't kill her, she'll kill me.
Yeah, and, to be fair, Olympias is going to use all the power at her disposal. I forget which chronicle it is, but the chronicle, reliable or unreliable as it may be, does record that she did have Philip and Eurydice killed in more or less the manner that Cassander describes. Like, none of these characters are free from flaws, and none of them are. We had a line in the first session that I keep coming back to, which was Perdiccas' line, who was the character who was sort of doing the best for a while and then died, killed by his own men. But at one point he said, all in these days must do or suffer wrong. So there's no morally right choice. Making the morally right choice would get you killed.
It's a constant zero-sum game. You are trying to get power, therefore you have to. Once you start vying for power, you have to kill all your enemies. There is no, and trying to look to Lysimachus almost like to just test the moral justification of these things and test these stories. And of course, these are the only people who are telling us about these events within this text. Whatever we may or may not know about the events outside of this text. This is the story that we're being told here. Thoughts of those who haven't been here before or haven't been here so much about just the scene overall and just the characters or the flow before we move on to the next scene? Valentina and then Lynsey.
Yeah, I just quite liked the kind of like, because when the scene started, I was like, are they talking to each other? Because I was like, I very much think that, and I very much think this. But like as the scene went by, like the communication became more and more direct. And I quite liked it, like how it's like, it reflected what's happening with the characters, which is quite nicely. Let's put it that way.
Lynsey.
Yes, and I think echoing that, the scene starts with longish speeches from both characters, which gradually, quite quickly, actually, not gradually, but they shorten. So it's more of a kind of line by line by line, argument like that. And I quite like the text so far. I mean, it's got a very regular rhythm, which makes it very easy to read. You're not kind of having to sort of, you're not being wrong-footed all the time by the stresses not being fairly regularly where they should be in iambic pentameter. And so it makes it quite, gives it a good driving force, which I think it probably needs because it's also quite wordy, but that's for what it's worth.
Lovely. Okay, Tom, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, it starts off very wordy, and they state their positions, etc. Then once there is a commitment, it gets nicely intimate. There is an intimacy between these two people, lovers who are thrown together. And the text becomes very rich because of that. Yes.
Okay. We now, having heard their side of the story, let's hear from Olympias, and then we'll run into the chorus to close the act. So, Act 4, Scene 3, Olympias alone.
Can I be she whom all the world admired as the most happy queen that reigned below, whom all the planets have to play conspired, of fickle fortune's course the power to show? No, not I. For what could me control or force me thus to attend another's will? Since I despise this prison of my soul, where it disdains to abide in bondage still. Oh, whilst vain pomp transported fancies fed, the jealous gods my state to grudge did tempt. My state, which envy once and reverence bred, though now it breed but pity and contempt. Olympias once high as Olympus stood, the wife of Philip, Alexander's mother, who matched Alcides and Achilles' blood to breed a man worth more than both together. Am I the woman whose majestic state seemed once so happy to deceived conceits? I am she, and never yet more great than at this present, even in spite of fates. A double bondage long did burden me, I to myself, myself to fortune thrall. But now captivity hath set me free, who could not rise till first I had a fall. A spirit whilst it prosperity benumbs, scarce like the self can to the world appear. But then, when virtue every cross o'ercomes, true greatness shines more bright in glory's sphere. Our treasure now I see consists no more without ourselves in the eye-betraying shows, but in the breast's inestimable store, which neither time entombs nor power o'erthrows. Oh, never were my thoughts enlarged till now, to mark myself and quintessence my mind, for long a prey to pride, I know not how, a mist of fancies made my judgment blind. As those who dream sweet dreams whilst waked at last do find their error when their eyes find light, free from the slumbering of my fortune past, I now arise to judge of all things right. That cloud of pomp whose smoke me shadowed once, lo, now removed, unmasks my life too late. And now I see that scepters, crowns, and thrones are burdenous badges of a dangerous state. Oh, happy woman of true pleasure sure, who in the country leads to guiltless life, from fortune's reach retired, obscure, secure, though not a queen, yet a contented wife. Thy mate, more dear to thee than is the light, though low in state, loves in a high degree, and with his presence still to bless thy sight doth scorn great courts, while he lives courting thee. And as thou wound'st him not with hid disgrace, he with no jealous thought doth rack thy breast. Thus both lie down to rest and rise in peace. Then if they strive who should love best. What though thou have not, as the mighty ones, thy neck surcharged with chains, chains indeed, nor ears weighed down with oriental stones, nor robes whose worth may admiration breed, so want'st thou that which we have ever had, sad miscontentments, jealousy, and spite. And though thy back be not with purple clad, thy thoughts are decked with innocency's white. As birds, whose cage of gold the sight deceived, do seem to sing whilst they but wail their state, so with the mighty matched, made glorious slaves, we happy seem, whilst we but curse our fate. That bliss whose show in us vain eyes doth please, makes thee indeed with pleasures spend thy breath, who liv'st while young in mirth, whilst aged in ease, and know'st not what it is to die till death. Since I lived, I always did but die, when seeming happy, then most wretched still, whilst dazzling with vain pomp each vulgar eye. What strange mishaps did me with anguish fill? The fates with fortune from my birth conspired to make my life a pattern of their might. For both my parents from the world retired when I had scarcely looked upon the light. The world may judge how I was justly grieved, whilst angry Philip sought for my disgrace, a thing which once I scarce could have believed, and unto Cleopatra gave my place. Then, though I long as desperate of relief for his offence afflicted had my mind, yet did his sudden death augment my grief. He was my husband, though he was unkind. And when my son's rare deeds, which fame doth sound, the world with wonder ravished, me with joy, those as himself, who would all his confound, to compass me did spite and power employ. Yet stood my courage when my fortune fell, and still I toiled to prosecute his foes, that some might fall down who too much did swell, their blood in marble registering my woes. That which I purposed long so prospered too, that some of them did try by torments strange all what a woman's just disdain could do, whilst spurred by jealousy, spite, and revenge. But this arch traitor, ruler of the rest, who thirsts to drink the blood of all our race, even then with us when all succeeded best, did compass me with ruin, disgrace. Such was the tenor of my fortune past, whose least mishap had made another burst. First orphaned, widowed, and unchilded last. A daughter, wife, and mother, all accursed. Heaven's plague, Cassander, let that base wretch try, that Jove his judgment for a while defers, and let his wife bewail as well as I murdered for my son, and she by hers. Even as the incestuous Thebans' monstrous brood, so may thy sons contend with mutual wounds, and never let thy house be free from blood, till banished quite from his usurped bounds. Thus, notwithstanding of my wonted power, to me save wishes nothing doth remain. But though condemned to die, yet at this hour should I begin to curse and to complain? No, no. That custom best becomes poor souls, whose resolution cannot climb more high. But I, whose courage that base course controls, must triumph still, whatever state I try. Death is the port where all may refuge find, the end of labor, entry unto rest. Death hath the bounds of misery confined, whose sanctuary shrouds affliction best. To suffer oft with a courageous heart, it doth deserve more praise than deeds most known. For in our actions fortune hath some part, but in our sufferings all things are our own. Lo, now I loathe the world and worldly things, of which I both have proved the best and worst. The apprehended death great comfort brings, and hath no cross but that it should be forced. Oh, hear me now, dear son, if that thy ghost may leave the Elysian fields to look on me. Of all things else this doth content me most, that from this time I may remain with thee. And blush not now to see thy mother's end. My death in glory with thy life shall strive. It as a captive fortune shall attend, that as thy fellow followed thee alive.
And exit, and we have the chorus to round off the act.
Though man, the image of great Jove and the only creature that gives reason place with reverence due unto the powers above, This heavenly progeny should seek to prove by still resembling the immortal kind, yet makes the world our better part so blind that we the clouds of vanity embrace, and from our first excellency decline. This doth distinguish that celestial grace which should make souls to burn with virtue's love, whose fantasies vice luxuriously now feasts. Vice is the Circe that enchants the mind, and does transform her followers all in swine, whilst poisoned pleasures so corrupt our tastes that of half gods we make ourselves whole beasts. And yet of ruthless Pluto's host, the vice which doth transport presumptuous hearts, and makes men from the gods to differ most, in cruelty that is to the sufferer's cost, and actors both, is oftentimes appeased. The gods delight to give and to forgive by pardoning, and not by plaguing pleased. And why should men excogitate strange arts to show their tyranny? And as those who strive to feed on mischief, though the author smarts for the deed of which himself did boast, whilst whence the blow first came, the grief doth turn, for that by which the mind at first was eased may in it, in the end, the greatest burden give. Oft those whose cruelty makes many mourn do by the fires which they first kindled burn. Of other tyrants which oppress the mind, with pleasure some delight in it such sort that first the honey then the gall we find, and others that from honour's court decline, some comfort yield but base by hope of gain. And those some make us to be loathed of one will by their means and others love obtain, but cruelty with which none can comport makes the authors hated when the deed is done, oft even by those who did most support, as that which alienates men from their kinds, and humanity the mind enchants, so barbarous souls which from the same refrain, more fierce than the savage beasts, are loved of none, since with such beasts one with less danger haunts than with the man whose mind all mercy wants. Yet though the mind of saying a struggle and rude be ravished with oft violent desire, and must defiled with rage be quenched with blood. How can this tender sex, whose glory stood in having hearts inclined to pity still, itself delight in any barbarous deed? For nature seems in this to use her skill in making women's minds the weak entire, that weakness might love and devotion breed, to which their thoughts, if pure, must best aspire, as aptest for the impressions of all good. But from the best to worst all things do wear, since cruelties from feeble minds proceed, in breasts whose courage fails, spite, shame, and fear, make envy, hate, and rigour rule to bear. Our Queen Olympias, who was once so great, that once so great as did such monstrous cruelties committing, plaguing Philippa his queen of late, lo, now brought blow to the taste the great estate, must take entertainment as she gave, and yet good reason that it should be so. Such measure as we give we must receive. What sort of throne she proudly erst did sit, and with disdainful eyes looked on her foe as only vanquished by her power and wit. She did not weigh what doth proceed from fate. Oh, the immortals which command above of every state in hand the rudder have, and yet as they like can make us stay or go. The grief of others should make us greatly move, as those sometime may make like fortune prove. But as experience with rare proofs have shown, to look on others we have lynx's eyes, or else we would have their imperfections known. Yet like blind moles can never mark our own. Such clouds of self-regard do dim our sight. Why should we be puffed up when foes do fall? Since what today will on another light, the same tomorrow may our state surprise. Those that on this inconstant constant ball do live environed with the all-encircling skies have many means whereby to be o'erthrown. And why should dying worldlings swallow with wrath, so tyrannize o'er an afflicted wight, since miseries are common unto all? Let none be proud who draw a doubtful breath. Good hap attends but few unto their death.
And exits. So we have confirmation from the chorus that the Queen Olympias did do some pretty terrible things. There's two witnesses, and the choruses don't often lie, which is awkward. Olympias' speech is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, there's some really nice stuff in there. It's just going, oh god, I've never seen the world so clearly as in prison. It's actually quite nice in here. I've got a window box and everything. We do some occupational therapy every so often. And then we sort of go into this sort of semi-pastoral fantasy of, if only I was a poor, ordinary person, living like poor people do. Well, I don't know what the poor do. Sit at home being happy, presumably. They don't have a kingdom to rule. So it's really interesting. And yeah, it really flows really nicely. And it's a nice, and I don't think this is a spoiler, it's a nice send-off for the character who we will not see again. Thoughts in the room. Who wants to leap in on Olympias? Because some really nice stuff there. Well, and the chorus as well. Of sort of closing off this act, which is doing a lot of power politics here. Who are friends? Who are in? Who's horribly, horribly not in? Liza.
Yeah, well, I very much enjoyed Olympias's speech, speaking it. It again, it seems a little more like a person talking or like a character talking than some verse that we get with Alexander. It's very much, it's very reminiscent of Hecuba from the Trojan Women. Relatedly, the only person in real life who I can think of speaking it is Katharine Hepburn. So, I don't know. I mean, as Rob pointed out very well, it's got a lot of antitheses in it that when she had power, she used that power to be cruel. And yeah, that was partly to defend her son and partly to defend herself, and partly because a lot of people were plotting to get her. Her marriage to Philip was unhappy. And I mean, yes, you can point out that Olympias doesn't seem to have a very realistic idea of how poor country folk live. But at the same time, it's actually kind of nice to have a little story about someone being happy in the middle of all of this, where people are normally telling each other stories about how someone died bloodily or how I killed millions of people and survived. To have that little
that sounds like something from the Times bestseller list, doesn't it? How I killed 10 million people and survived.
Yes. Just to have that little pastoral idyll, it does provide kind of a nice break. And it says something that maybe the most optimistic scene in the play is of someone in prison waiting to die. But at least now she knows that nothing worse can happen to her. And at least now she's not going to harm anyone else, and she has some perspective on her life. And another thing is that I'm really glad that this speech didn't stray into misogyny, because it could have. It could have said, oh, I'm a woman, I shouldn't have had such power. Do you see what happens when you give power to women? But no, she wore her greatness while alive. She did absolutely what was in the job description if you are Queen of Macedon and the mother of the conqueror of the world. And what kind of mother do you have to be than that when your son comes up to you and is like, Mom, I'm just gonna go conquer Persia.
Okay, dear, be back in time for tea.
Don't wait up.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Any additional thoughts before we move on into Lynsey?
Yeah, just I have to kind of look again to know if this is a really worthwhile point. But I was struck as it was flowing out so beautifully from Liza that she's very mercurial, and I do wonder if that's there is a sort of hint of the misogyny in there. The chorus says in the speech afterwards, oh, well, women's minds are complete but weak. And I just wondered if there's a characterization there because of the mercurialness that, that's where the misogyny is, if you like. But I'd have to look again to know if that was a really valid point.
and at least the kind of use that choruses tend to get given is to make that point, whereas it's nice the characters don't. That's one of the issues I always have with choruses, because they always tend to drift in that direction. It's very annoying. Okay, we're not going to go to Act 5, Scene 1, so scroll through it. I'm gonna tell you a little about it. We read it last time, out of order. And it's two philosophers have a chat, basically, about how they used to work for Alexander, be involved with Alexander the Great, and they both sort of left him, and but one of them left him, more than the other one did. No, I definitely left him more than you did, and they sort of. I think someone put in the chat, I think it was Eric, or was it Liza, I can't remember, but put in the chat last time, which basically mics are dropped all over the stage. They're just constantly dropping mics at each other. Basically they just talk about Alexander, who's no longer here, and mention in passing that his offspring are all dead. So we can assume that the threatened death of Olympias and her children and extended family has occurred. I could be wrong on that point. It was a sort of in passing line. To die even by the swords by which they killed, and all his offspring expiates his sin, suggests that they're not with us anymore. But so they sort of mention plot in passing. But on the whole, actually, it's a very nicely, again, like Olympias' speech, it's sort of nicely isolated, and it does an interesting, different thing to the rest of the text. But we're going to dive into Act 5, Scene 2, which is it's not just a duologue, it's not a monologue, it's dialogue. There are there are 4 people in the room. They're all talking. I know. Quite chunky, some of the talking, but there are definitely 4 of them. So Act 5, Scene 2, we have Cassander, Lysimachus, who we met earlier, Ptolemy, who we haven't seen since Act 1, and Act 2 rather, and Seleucus, who, maybe Act 2 as well, might have been in Act 3, I can't remember. But anyway, some generals we haven't seen for a while, and some people we saw quite recently. So Act 5, Scene 2, Cassander starts first.
No doubt, great heroes whom the heavens have loved, whatever countenance duty doth pretend, your minds are glad, since those by me removed, who might have made you end, have made an end. Loathe not the means, if pleased with the effect, for though by this I have a realm obtained, it yields you more, whose course none can suspect. I only guilty am, ye all have gained. Yet to pursue my life they first began, for my defence this refuge last I proved. What then himself can be more near to man? When bragged by danger, who would not be moved? And if Olympias had not died in time by offering up her blood to work my peace, then mine had been the harm, and hers the crime. I but prevented her a little space, and if her offspring had survived her death, whose rising could not procure our fall, ye, now who naught but sovereignty do breathe, had breathed obedience, or not breathed at all.
You from a dangerous yoke have us relieved, which I suspect we should have tried too soon. And why then should we labour to seem grieved at that thing done, which we wish not undone? No, since for all sovereignty do strive, and have once tasted what it is to reign, each one of us would rather die than live to bear a subject serve our yoke again. And though perchance with Alexander's son, if heir to him, worth as of his state, we must have most respected places won as special pillars of the prince's seat. Though greater than the rest as of before, it would have vexed us less than one to fall. The fall from first to second grieves one more than from the second to the last of all. Our envied glory had destruction brought, and would have made us odious to remain. It is dangerous. Dangerous is for subjects to be thought such as desire or yet deserve to reign. When any tempest threatened had his throne, he would have sought for surety at our cost. When jealousy, mind's worm, have seized on one, the greatest virtues are suspected most. Yet though we could to quite our state consent, as from suspicion naught but death could purge, still greatness must turmoil or when torment, if born a burthen, it laid upon a scourge.
But when we have within our bosom weighed the ruin of Alexander's race, whom without blushing we might have obeyed, by right succeeding in our sovereign place, how can our souls highly be ashamed, if one below them, far emboldened thus, doth seek by wrong that which by right they claimed, and by their o'erthrow would insult us? Nor need I more as in suspense remain to mask my meaning with ambiguous words. No, our words may as his deeds be plain, which fame, and that not whispering, now records. Ye hear how that Antigonus of late, whose thoughts winged with good success soar too high, doth strive above the rest to raise his state, and by all means doth fortune frankly ply. Since to his hands Eumenes was betrayed, lo, quite transported by prosperous pride, as if in naught adapted to our aid, to yield our due he cannot now abide.
As time the truth of all things doth proclaim, man is a crafty creature hard to know, and a face for every fortune frame. No trust in mortals, no, nor faith below, as our particulars do sometimes move. We what we wish for most seem to mislike, and often of others do the course disprove, whilst we want only means by the like. Then whilst Perdiccas did contempt before to make the rest who were his equals thrall, who then Antigonus detested more, the foolish pride of one that would have all. But since Perdiccas and his faction fell, whom he as traitors to the state pursued, he in his place succeeding to rebel, have what seemed to end again renewed. And yet I many times amused of this, how far from the world he did you many send.
How? But by treason, as his custom is, false at first, and cruel in the end.
I know that after many doubtful fights he hath overthrown Eumenes at the last. By what stratagems or treacherous sleights, I would be glad to hear how all hath passed.
Antigonus was at the first afraid to match Eumenes by plain force in fight, and therefore all that fear affords essayed, for valour frank, still using wary sleight. Amongst Eumenes' troops their minds to prove, he scattered letters with allurements stored by promised treasures and protested love, so to corrupt whom might betray their lord. But he, still wise, his troops in times advised to clear their virtue by their enemies' vice, and give them thanks who would not be enticed to sell their faith at such bloody price. Then said that he himself those scrolls procured, that when they spied such practices gain, they still might think them by this means allured, their captain's trial not their enemies' train. Thus by the course which should have him entrapped, his advisory did delude stay, whilst both he from that present danger scrapped, and to prevent the like prepared a way. Then when he saw his policy had failed, and that there had some doubtful conflicts passed, Antigonus, who had at once prevailed, as having some vantage at the last, did Eumenes straight procure to speak. And as to the one vanquished, offer to him goodwill, but he whose minds could not be brought to break would only talk as his equal still. For when a ban between them was made, did bear, he to Antigonus should help in part, that from reform he first of all would swear with Alexander's offspring to take part. Thus, where his submission did attend, imperiously conditioned he imposed, so and thereafter to procure his end. The other by all means his minds disposed, and shortly of his bands a vain debate, for his confusion fit occasion brought. Still, as by concord small things do grow great, by discord great things are reduced to naught. While Eumenes' fortune lived, and Agrippides to him gave place, till for that state two of their captains strived, and his authority would not embrace. Such was that sprite of theirs who had him spoiled, that though of valor he rare wonders proved, and oft by force Antigone was foiled, yet from their minds it could not be removed. For by their means allured and other bands to get some baggage which they lost again, did take their captains with outrageous hands, their glory darkening by that odious stain, and through humanity's trusting to new hopes, by flying a labor secured to have found, he was prevented by this treacherous troop, and like to some base fugitive was bound. Scarce could his stormy stomach, bent to break, design to entreat those who had him betrayed, yet having hardly purchased leave to speak, he stretched them forth his fettered hand and said, Lo, what a peril now your great general wears, since with your faith his liberty was lost. Yet he those bands not given by his enemy bears, no, but by you in whom he trusted most. And must he thus be led who should you lead? Is this triumph which I should receive for all my victories thus to be made of captain, captive, or a conqueror, slave? How oft, my soldiers, have ye all of late to me by solemn oath sworn to be true, but it becomes none in a captive state, with lofty words his keepers to pursue. Nor crave I further favour at this hour than that ye bathe your weapons in my breast. Let not my life in Let not my life be in mine enemy's power. Lo, all that your commander doth request. I know Antigonus doth take no care who get my body, so he get my head. And he regards not neither when nor where, nor in what sort I die, so I be dead. But if through horror of so vile a deed your eyes look down, your hair erect stands, which in your minds thus this much remorse doth breed, yet at your hearts will ye not stain your hands. Then as your captain, since not force I may, as your friend entreat, that now in time I may but have a sword myself to slay. You to excuse while partner of your crime, but when he saw the words could not assuage their barbarous thoughts, which nothing could control, then having turned his courage all to rage, he thus flamed forth the fury of his soul. O damn rascals who have lost all faith, whom neither duty nor merit binds, how often was Alexander moved to wrath by those your mutinous and malicious minds. And oh, what could I at those hands attend, which yet were smoking with Perdiccas' blood, of those who by like treason did intend with old Antipater to be imbrued. Heaven thunder on you from the ethereal rounds and make you live, abominable band, by base vagabonds barred from your native bounds. Then die detested in barbarous lands, as ye had the world with murder filled. So may your blood by the same swords be shed by which you have mote your captain killed. Then of your foes from whom, like beasts, ye fled, be neither courageous nor outrageous words could charge his soldiers from their first intent, who forward led their captain chain with cords a scorned captive to this rival's tent. Were to the end that he might quickly end, he asked that strayed Antigonus to go, by setting him free to gain a friend, or by his death to rid him of a foe. And soon Antagones did haste his fall, by this great magnanimity not moved, and by Antigraphis despised all, as murder's murder from the world removed. Thus often have traitors been dispatched in time, by those whom their upbraiding looks dismay, that loathe remembrance of the author's crime, the actor's death can only wipe away. Now claims Antigonus, when fame doth feast, above his sovereign's self in rank to sit, for Alexander but subdued the East, and he hath conquered them who conquered it.
No doubt, but he will do the best he can, and hath within himself high things designed. For whilst prosperity transports a man, naught seems difficult to a lofty mind.
Of those in whom he did suspect a sprite, whose courage served his course to resist, he hath himself by divers means made quite. In others' racks his safety doth consist. Thus Martial Python, who no danger spurred, whom Alexander held in high account, did at the last receive a hard reward for helping him Eumenes to surmount, his sprite to tempt, and power fit to perform. Made jealous Antagones torment, and yet he feigned to love him from the form, till he his court did move him to frequent, where whilst he did mistrusting naught abide, he publicly in all the people's sight, though seeming justly damned unjustly died. No wrong more vile than went wrong that looks like right. Thus diverse governors within short space their government, or then their life have lost, and others are preferred unto their place, who did depend upon his favour most. Oft likewise he laboured to surprise by policy whom he would have o'erthrown, but I, whom Python's danger had made wise, learned by his ruin to prevent my own. To save my life abandoned by him in my state, I have fled with danger, as you see, that you may know that man doth grow great, whose pride may plague you all as well as me.
Then let us see what course we should intend, lest out of time made wise we rue too late.
That I'd rather first pursue than last defend.
A fire would still be quenched ere it grow great.
Then let us from Antigonus in haste demand our share of what he did attain, since in this war we did our treasure waste. We should be likewise partners of the gain. But if against our suit he his ears he bar, and do with scornful words contemn our claim, then may our messenger denounce the war, and we shall shortly prosecute the same.
A mutual bend must made amongst us be, to make one fortune common to us all, and from henceforth we must all four agree to stand together, or together fall. And since the princely buds for which we cared, however dead, are dead, whate'er we do, so to procure from men the more regard, we with the state must take the title too, and we must both be crowned and known for kings. The diadem of greatness is the tower, all vulgar judgments lean on the outward thing, and reverence state where they obey, but power.
And they exit. All for one and all for me. So we hear about Eumenes, who in the previous act, there was this lovely scene between him and Antigonus going, yeah, I'll be your friend, that'd be great. Eumenes bit deaded. Quite a moving little, he gets a reported death speech with sort of two acts, once of don't kill me, and the other of Q then, which I quite liked. Again, it's the kind of thing in production I'm thinking, if we've got an actor in to play him, we'd probably give him these speeches, and we can set up a little scene upstage where comes in and does that stuff. Thoughts from the room about this this alliance between the four here? I'm sure it's very stable, and they're all going to be friends. Because whenever anyone says they're going to be friends, they're always friends for life. Friendship is forever. Lynsey.
Just a really small point, but I did think that Cassander must be plotting away while all of this is going on, because it's unlike Cassander to basically be silent and listen. He just must be kind of steadily going, yes, 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 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think any of them are doing anything other than going, yeah. I really want to hear about Eumenes. Yeah, I really care, because we've already decided we're going to go for Antigonus anyway, so it doesn't matter whether he's deaded any of his people. I mean, plot wise, again, don't worry about plot. Plot is not important. It's all about what's going on. This scene is primarily about this. As I say, this death speech, and then there's some plot stuff going on, and just generally, Ptolemy, at the end there going, basically all for one and one for all. I'm going, yeah, absolutely. Thunder, Thundercats, ho, yeah. Other thoughts, Tom? Please save me.
Thundercats. You really need to get this on its feet. It's that was quite pacey and quite powerful, and as I say, would look and sound much better when it's on its feet and striding around and being enacted. And that I like the whole thing that 10 little Indians, one by one, they're all falling down and leaving the scene and being given over to their enemies, and that is a nice power play.
Yes, and then there were none, I think, is the modern phrase for that one. Any other thoughts from the room before we go into the final scene? The final scene. It's nearly all over. It's nearly all done with. No more thoughts. Okay, so Act 5, Scene 3, into a chorus at the end. But the chorus not only speaks at the end, the chorus popped in for a chat. In fact, it's one of those great scenes. We've got Nuntius, a messenger, chorus, chatty people, and Philastrus, who I think is some kind of prophet, apparently. So we're all, I think we're going to say that, you know, we're not going to meet any of the characters we've met before again. And I think this might be something winding up the action. So much as this player is interested in action. So Act 5, Scene 3, Nuntius, Philastrus, and Chorus.
Is there a heaven? And are there heavenly powers to whose decree terrestrial things are thrall? Or with the tyrant that begets the hours, eternity not spared, extinguish all? Lo, nature travails now, as big with change, since mortals whole humanity have lost, and in the old chaos, or some mass more strange, to leave their essence all things earthly boast. Can reasonable souls, from reason barred, even strive which most in cruelty exceeds? What eye hath seen, or yet what ear hath heard, such monstrous chance and prodigious deed? The Arabian robbers, nor the Scythians wild, with savage beasts which do, as barbarous, haunt, with such foul facts have not themselves defiled, as those who of civility do vaunt. Since Greeks, grown barbarous, basely are inclined, all virtue vanished is, all good forgot. O careless heavens, wretched earth!
What loads thy mind?
A multitude of murders.
What?
What not?
We know that since our sovereign lost his breath, the earth had been bathed with many a crimson flood. Perdiccas did procure Meleager's death, and as his own soldiers drowned his breath with blood, the Athenians Praelianatus did remain, and by Eumenes' subtlety dismayed, Neoptolemus and Craterus were slain. Then by his own Eumenes was betrayed.
Man with his skill against his knowledge strives, where death his way attends, that way he tends. And Tatropos, the fatal razor, gives to cut the thread on which his life depends. When Asia's victor, after all his wars, great Babylon to view had bent his mind, both I and others, studious of the stars, did show that there his ruin was designed. And to his successors we oft have shown the means by which their fate might be controlled. Yet was our skill contemned, and they o'erthrown, as we foretold, and as they now have told.
They have told much, and yet I must tell more. Their news were evil, yet were they not the worst.
And have the heaven reserved more plagues in store, as if we yet were not enough accursed?
As the earth in pride, the heavens in plagues abounds. Our highest hopes have perished but of late.
Then wound our ears by hearing of the wounds, that pity now may tread the steps of hate.
Our Queen Olympias, raging with revenge, all Macedonia did with murders fill, which from her part the people did estrange, whilst rigour only limited her will. So that when fierce Cassander sought her wreck, she did mistrust the Macedonians' minds, and for the time the nearest strength did take, there, till the storm was past, to wait fair winds. But soon Cassander did the town enclose, and as she held him out, did hold her in, that, like a captive guarded by her foes, she knew not by what way a way to win. And when life's scant provision did decay, then did bare walls but small refuge afford. She Scylla escaped to be Charybdis' prey, who fell on famine flying from the sword. Straight like pale ghosts, faint soldiers did remain, whose bowels hunger like a harpy tears. And with courageous words the queen in vain did raise their spite, the belly hath no ears. Or languishing did then begin to fade, as if too weak to bear themselves about. Legs failed the body, and the neck the head. Then whilst the flesh fell in, bones burst out. And when that meats which common hour were spent, then horses, dogs, cats, rats, all served for food, of which no horror the eaters did torment, for what not poison was, all then seemed good. Some mouths accustomed once with dainty meats wished what they oft had loathed, vile crumbs, foul floods, and ladies which had lived in pompous states fed as brought up with wolves amongst the woods. Yeah, nursed by those whom they themselves had nursed, oft by the offspring's death their parents lived. And which was worst, while breasts were like to burst, none could give comfort, all themselves were grieved. Such was their state, no friend bewailed his friend, no wife her husband, no sire his son, for apprehending their approaching of themselves were one. The dead men's smell and poison them who lived, whilst first made faint by the frauded womb, heaps were of breath and burial both deprived, that all the town in end was but a tomb.
Life is the subject of distress and grief that still affords us matter to bemoan, and we by death can only have relief. To live and to be wretched are both but one, yet foolish worldlings tossed with endless care, though at too dear a rate, would still buy breath. And following feathers wavering through the air, love life, though wretched, more than a happy death.
When thus the world Olympias plagued did spy, all sought Cassander, though for several ends.
All as a pest them all as a pest them who are wretched do fly. Eclipsed fortune threatens loss of friends.
And she, considering that she could not long hold out the siege, since victuals were grown scant, did send, as weak, for peace unto the strong.
Thus time and travel all things once may daunt.
Then did Cassander know that need constrained her so to bow as every way diseased, and though he her request not quite disdained, yet the appointment was such as he pleased, for all the favour that she could procure was leave to live a private person still, and yet of that she could not be made sure, which did depend upon the victor's will. Then was Cassander sought his enemy's end, huge numbers with him always did abide.
Yet might have many followers and few friends.
But though the queen was rendered in this sort, a promise given that life should be preserved, the tyrant with a sprite could not comport, but from his faith for her confusion swerved. The Macedonians were together brought, there to consult what did concern their queen, of whom, when as a number deeply thought, both what she was and what she had once been, even as Cassander had subdued them all, their parents came, who she had damned to death, and did her rigour to remembrance call, by which the multitude was moved to wrath, whilst from their breasts all pity quite was barred. They did conclude their queen behoved to die.
The subjects damn their sovereign are not heard, so still may clouds obscure the world's bright eye.
Yet did Cassander put, falsely every way, a mask of pity on a cruel mind, and offered her a ship to fly away, as if to death against his will assigned. Nor was this course for her the leave refrained, but only as by chance that she might drown, so for her death that he might not be blamed, but only Neptune, who had drunk her down. Yet she, a princess of a mighty sprite, whose lofty courage nothing could overcome, said, ere she escaped by such a shameful flight, that she would hear the Macedonians' doom. But when Cassander's counsel was contemned, lest that the multitude had changed their mind, when they remembered whom they had condemned, and did the fullness of his purpose find. To rid her soon from pain and him from fear, he sent some bends from pity most estranged. Yet she gainst fortune did the banner bear, and not her heart, no, not her countenance changed. She constant still, though moaned, would never moan, whose stately gestures braved their bold attempt, and did unite her virtues all in one, to grace disgrace and glorify contempt. She on two ladies' shoulders leaned her arms, and with her majesty did march to death, like Alexander once amidst the alarms, as if in triumph to abandon breath. The height of virtue admiration brings, and this great magnanimity amazed, as at the image of the ancient kings, or than some goddess all the soldiers gazed. But some forced by the tyrant, strived to spoil unnatural nature's fairest frame, and twixt the alabaster bowls they drived the unwilling swords that straight grew red for shame. Then she in worth, who did all else excel, would neither word nor tear nor sigh forth send, but spread her garments o'er her whilst she fell, as of her honour jealous to the end.
Oh, strange barbarity! Most monstrous deed! Could men or woman subjects kill their queen? And could her fortune pass no pity breed? Whoever gave the wound have not her seen. The ugly author of those odious evils of punishment afraid must still be sad. His breast to hell, his thoughts all turned to devils, though horror of himself must make him mad.
And yet the plague of these detested times doth by more mischief aggravate our groans.
No end in sin, crimes are maintained by crimes whose falls and depths must touch the bosom once. The paths of honour have but narrow bounds, on whose step attentive must remain, since raised so high above the vulgar grounds, as who thence fall can never rise again.
Thus now Cassander, since he cannot win true reputation, but lives tainted still, embarked in mischief, fails the depths of sin, so if not loved as good, yet feared as ill. Though by his means his ruthless eyes have seen fate, as it were from fortune's bosom, take his king by poison, by the sword his queen, even yet himself more guilty still to make. He, prospering in impiety, grew proud and murdered both his master's son and wife. Thus he, who all the world by birthright owed, could have no part of it, no, not his life. Yet could Roxanne's death not ease his mind, nor her young son, too soon made Pluto's guest. But to undo all Alexander's kind, that to revenge the rest, there might none rest. By treason he, all his deeds are done, caused Hercules his brother's steps to trace, who was great Alexander's bastard son, and the only remnant of that great man's race. Lo, thus Cassander, enemy to all, whose soul so much for Macedonia longs, hath to the sceptre swimmed through seas of blood, yet, weak right, since builded but on wrongs.
Oh, how ambition doth abuse the great, who with enough not pleased still strive for more. Lo, how our sovereign seemed to raise his state and made it but to fall while starved with store. And since his trophies reared in several fields, both him and his have to confusion brought. Then what is all the good that greatness yields, which makes itself esteem much to be made naught? Thus, though the mountains make a mighty show, they are but barren heaps borne up aloft, where plains are pleasant still, though they lie low, and are most fertile too, though trod on oft. Greatness is like a cloud in the airy bounds, which some base vapours have congealed above. It brawls with Vulcan, thundering forth huge sounds, yet melts and falls there whence it first doth move.
Since that world's conqueror then, whilst far from fear, by too much power pressed, so soon was dead, why do his captains strive, who now should bear the diadem that crushed so strong a head? Oh, when my mind is ravished through the stars to search the secret secrets of the fates, what treasons, murders, mutinies, and wars are threatening to o'erthrow usurped seats, that false Cassander who betrayed his lord and spoiled the princely race, in mischief chief, a traitor both of heaven and earth abhorred, shall live but with disgrace and die with grief. His sons in wickedness himself to exceed shall make the women die who made them live. Then both, when drunk with blood, to death shall bleed, and none of theirs their funerals shall survive. When rash ambition should be cooled by age, Lysimachus shall by Seleucus die, nor shall Seleucus long enjoy the stage, but by like violence shall breathless lie. And subtle Ptolemy's degenerate race, long only famous for infamous things, shall end, and to the pride of foes give place, whilst a lascivious queen confusion brings. Antigonus shall be in battle killed, his son, a captive, perish with disgrace. And after that it Greece with blood hath filled, in the end destruction doth attend that race. The last in power, though of their line not bred, a niggard and a dastard beaten down, shall through a stranger's town a captive led, of Macedonia bound the old renown.
I lost myself again. So I have completely lost the place.
It's the last page or two. Chorus, what damned furies.
Oh, nothing. I still bloody can't find it. Sorry.
Head to the end of the document and then scroll up.
Yeah, I got it. Sorry. What damned furies does toss mortals' minds with such a violent desire to reign, that neither fortune, friendship, duty, blood, nor yet no band so sacred is as binds ambitious thoughts which would kingdom gain. But all is buried in black Lisa's flood, that may the course of sovereignty restrain, which from the breast doth all respects repel, and like a torrent cannot be gainstood. Yea, many would a sceptre to obtain, in spite of all the world and Jove's own wrath, march through the lowest dungeons of the hells, and from a diadem would breathe with power, though all death's engines bragged them every hour. Yet though such restless minds attain in the end the height to which their haughty hearts aspired, they never can embrace that dreamed bliss which their deluded thoughts did apprehend. Though by the multitude they be admired, that's still to the power doth show itself submiss, yet by the soul still further is required, which should scale up the accomplishment of joy. Thus partial judgments blindly aim amiss at things which stand without our reach retired, which was not ours as treasures we define, not the same whilst we be the same enjoy. Some things afar do like the glow-worm shine, which look too near have of that light no sign. No charge on the earth more weighty to discharge than that which of the kingdom doth dispose. Oh, those who can manage must the reins of state, till their pale ghost embark in Charon's barge, that they never need to attend a true repose. How hard is it to please each man's conceit? When gaining one, they must another lose. Thus, hardly kings themselves can evenly bear, whom, if severe as cruel subjects hate, contempt dare to the mild itself oppose, who spare in time as niggards are despised, men from too frank a mind executions fear. Though in all shapes, as Proteus used, disguised, kings by some scandal always are surprised. Yet one might well with everything comport, which on opinion only doth depend, if further danger followed not by deeds, but every monarch, lo, in many a sort, death laid in ambush always doth attend. Of some by mutinous swords the life forth bleeds, by unsuspected poison others end, which whilst they always labour to prevent, 1,000 deaths within their breasts life breeds. Lo, this is all for which the great contend, who whilst their pride themselves and others spoils, with their dominions do their cares augment. And oh, vain man, who toilest double toils, though still the victory the victor foils. Thus Alexander could not be appeased, whilst he to raise his state did ways prepare, which when made most, diminished most remained. Where, with his father's bounds, he had been pleased, he might have left our crown sure to his heir, who by his conquest naught but death have gained. Yet for no pains unnumbered now doth spare to work for that by which his wreak was wrought, though from it they rage to be restrained, which it would if possess their pleasures but impair, yet they harm of others seek the same thing, which by their harm of others will be sought. To him and his, each of them death would bring, that it might once be said, he was a king. He may securely sitting on the shore, whilst each great men do as tossed on the ocean groan, taught by their toils esteem much of our rest. For this doth thousands with affliction store, which the world does most unhappy moan, if they but chance to view some few would more blessed. Where if they would but mark how many are one more wretched than they in misery doth live, if it straight would calm the most unquiet breast, the cottage oft is happier than the throne. Think our own state good and others ill, it could not but a great contentment give. There much consists in the conceit and will, to us all things are as we think them still.
So in the final scene, broadly speaking, the moral of the story is it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Just don't try and take over and or hold a kingdom. It's just just don't. Just it's going to end in chaos and confusion and death. Just stay within your bounds. Don't dream. Don't think big. Just raise some sheep, and I mean, alternatively, Act 5, Scene 3 could be called A Multitude of Murders, where you're sort of just going tick, tick, who's dead, and they're dead, and they're dead, and they're, and it just sort of goes through all the people. Cassander was always a wrong un. He was always gonna die, and they all die, and everything turns to dust, and ultimately all of the line of Ptolemy will eventually come to an end with presumably Cleopatra. Just says a lascivious queen. I'm assuming that's who they mean, because that's usually how early modern people label her. It wraps everything up, sort of. I mean, it's the kind of play where, because it's not that interested in direct plot and following certain people's lives, but, where do you stop it, really? Where do you end? Well, how do you wrap it up? Because otherwise you just follow everyone and they'd all, and we'd follow all these people individually dying, just going, no, it just keeps going. It's just that's the end of the story, is this just never ends. It just keeps going. People are just going to keep doing this forever. Sleep, and don't have nightmares. Thoughts of the room. I'm talking a lot. We've only got a few minutes left because we've gone long because of lots of technical problems. So I sort of going to go around the room for final thoughts as well as thoughts about this scene. Lynsey, would you?
Yes, final thoughts. Really. I'm just not. It's very wordy for a play, and I'm not sure if. I mean, I haven't done the first two sessions, so I don't know, but I'm just not sure if it's something a modern audience would actually kind of sit through, without extreme cutting, but that may be sacrilege. So
No, cut away. He's dead. I mean, it is massively too long. I mean, overall, it's 28,000 words. That that is too. I mean, there are some plays where productions that go for that kind of length, but not in my universe. But also, of course, we have other media. It's as an audio thing, we could luxuriate in individual episodes per scene, pretty much, actually, because there's a lot to unpack. But you're right, there's a lot of people talk. There's a lot of it, and it's very rich, and it's quite a meal to digest in one sitting.
Yeah.
But I'm waiting for the computer game version. That's what I'm. I think there's a core text here that might work quite well. Valentina, again, you've been thrown in at the deep end of these sort of closing stages of this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, maybe not on stage. Although I would really love to, I mean, as much as I find it very funny that the messenger comes in and goes like, and there's more, and this happened, and there's more. You just go like, I find it very funny, but I would love to see the scene before the last, and then everybody just going we're all together, and then one beat and everybody turns around with swords and things like that, and that pretty much sums it up. It's fine. Yeah. But I don't know, I've not seen the rest of the play. I agree that it's really, really, really worthy. But...
I mean, it is one of these texts which is, on the more literature side of the literary theatre divide. Yeah. I mean, it's very much designed for reading rather than performance. But that doesn't mean that without, with heavy cutting, that No,
it's really enjoyable to read. I just don't know if how it work on stage. But if you do some, if it on audio, or I mean, the game idea is can work.
I think there's some really interesting individual scenes as well. I mean, we had a couple of really nice speeches here as well. I'm just sort of thinking, maybe atomized this works better than or if you're doing a staging that actually you go big and you make it a whole day thing, and it's all and there's other stuff to go with it, and it's actually a more, I wouldn't say fully immersive, but that kind of thing where it actually sort of explodes and you actually add the history that I've been eschewing through the entire process, actually, of saying, actually, no, there's other avenues of these people that might be interesting, that you actually add to it, and saying, 28,000 words, it's just not long enough. If we're going to fill a whole day, we're going to get it up to at least 50. Hire some other writers to do other things. Tom, you were here for the first session, but I've missed the middle. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think somebody said that, talking heads type of thing, but with Cohen brother production values. Or the other thing is I once watched a dance performance by Pina Bausch from the dance theatre of Wuppertal, and it went on for 3.5 hours without a break. And part of the joy of it was looking at the audience. They were just flopped all over the place. They just couldn't handle 3.5 hours of this free flow performance, which, as you say, if you're gonna do it, kill them. Leave them with something to talk about for the rest of their lives. But otherwise, it's going to take some intelligent writing, I think.
Yeah, the idea of it as an endurance event, I quite like. that appeals to me, because there are people who I've done 2 all-day sort of shows and things where part of the point of the event is actually go, I was there, I survived it. I got to the front of the lunch queue when the entire audience ran during the first big interval. I didn't starve. I brought a very comfy cushion, and I got through to it to the end. Liza, any final thoughts? You've been here all the way through.
I have. Well, I'd be up for a video game of this as long as you can play as Olympias and end up killing everyone else and becoming supreme ruler of the world. In some ways, this is strikingly modern. It has that sort of, Ibsen or Strindberg feel where everyone is terrible and the entire play is just terrible people being terrible to each other, and then they all die in terrible ways. So it has that nihilistic feeling to it, for which Alexander coins the term, William Alexander coins the term polytragic tragedy. But because it's again, he's pretty obviously not writing for stage here. One of the, there aren't many moments that to me feel actually tragic. There's a lot of tragedy in the sense of flawed characters who have flaws and virtues, but their flaws doom them. But, you meet people, you see them making decisions, you see them forming alliances, and then you just sort of hear that they're dead. And partly it's a neoclassical thing, that the action takes place off stage and everything is just related. Everything is just narrated by people to other people. But because it all takes place at sort of one remove, it's a little bit hard to feel that immediacy of emotion that we associate with tragedy.
We said, I think, in the first session, it's Alexander's tragedy, but he's already dead. He's already feeling the effects of the tragedy in the first scene of the play, and then it's just we sort of watch as every element of his entire life's work is unravelled before him. It doesn't lend itself to a standard theatre performance, but there's part of me thinking there's something here. There's things. I following on Tom's thought was just maybe television, maybe filmed kind of context for some of this might work quite nicely. That talking head style, close-ups, two people in a room talking, actually gives it a bit more of an edge even on the audio, where I was initially going, because actually you've got something to hang your hat on with who people are in a way that audio doesn't always give you. Sometimes it's quite difficult to know what's going on, because Alexander is very bad at exposition. He's not interesting at exposition. You should have read the argument at the beginning. You should know who everybody is before you start reading it, and that's annoying. But anyway, I must close the session because we've overrun because of technical things. Hopefully the random cuts that will exist in this video were not too jarring and that we didn't accidentally miss any lines out. All that remains is to thank all the wonderful readers for all the wonderful reading. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye. A multitude of murders.